The morning Pacific sun cast long shadows across Oceanic Naval Air Station as maintenance crews prepared for the annual Fleet Week demonstration. Among the bustling activity, one figure moved almost invisibly through the crowd, Nathan Morris, pushing his cleaning cart with practiced precision. At 68, his weathered hands gripped the mop handle with the same steady control that had once commanded the stick of an F-14 Tomcat. Welcome to the Story Chronicles, where legends hide in plain sight. Subscribe now and witness how one moment can shatter every assumption you've ever made about heroism. The young aviators barely noticed him as they strutted past in their pressed flight suits, gold wings gleaming on their chests. To them, Nathan was just another maintenance worker, invisible as the salt air that swept across the tarmac. His Navy-issued coveralls bore only his first name, stitched above the pocket. No rank, no ribbons, no indication of the extraordinary man beneath the ordinary facade. "Watch it, old-timer," called out Lieutenant Jake Mitchell, shouldering past Nathan without a second glance. Coffee sloshed from Nathan's thermos onto his worn boots as he steadied himself against the hangar wall. The young pilot's friends laughed, their voices echoing in the cavernous space where million-dollar aircraft waited like sleeping giants. Nathan said nothing. He never did. For 15 years he had worked these hangars, cleaning around the very aircraft he had once mastered, listening to cocky young pilots discuss tactics he had pioneered decades earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was surrounded by his legacy, yet completely unseen by those who lived it daily. But today was different. Today, his son would fly. The crowd gathering outside Hangar 12 numbered in the thousands, families and aviation enthusiasts, drawn by the promise of witnessing the Navy's finest in action. Nathan positioned himself at the back, behind the rope barriers, his cleaning cart parked nearby, as if he belonged to the infrastructure rather than the audience. A family with young children pushed past him, the father pointing toward the flight line where sleek F-18 Super Hornets sat in formation, their canopies glinting like diamonds in the morning light. "Those are real fighter jets," the man explained to his wide-eyed son. "Only the best pilots in the world get to fly machines like that." Nathan's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. If only they knew how many of those best pilots had learned their craft in a classroom where he had been the instructor, where his voice had guided them through the intricacies of air combat maneuvering and carrier landings that separated Navy aviators from all others. The public address system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fleet Week at Oceanic Naval Air Station. In just moments, you'll witness the incredible precision and power of our F-18 Super Hornet demonstration team." Nathan's eyes tracked to the flight line where ground crews performed their final checks. Somewhere among those gleaming aircraft was his son, Dylan Cooper, though the family name meant nothing to the crowds who had come to watch. Dylan had chosen his mother's maiden name when he enlisted, a decision Nathan had supported without question. The boy deserved to make his own way, to earn his wings without the weight of expectations that came with being the son of a Top Gun legend. A group of teenagers nearby were taking selfies, trying to look military by mimicking fighter pilot poses. One spotted Nathan and nudged his friend. "Look at the janitor trying to see over everyone," he snickered. "Probably doesn't even know what those planes are called." Nathan adjusted his position slightly, not in response to their mockery, but to get a better view of the aircraft taxi procedures. His trained eye automatically assessed wind conditions, noting the slight crosswind component that would make the demonstration more challenging. These weren't the controlled conditions of a training flight. This was live, with thousands watching, where even the smallest error would be magnified. The lead aircraft began its taxi, followed in tight formation by 3 others. Nathan recognized the configuration immediately, though he kept his observations to himself. These young pilots were executing a diamond formation rollout, a maneuver that required absolute precision and trust among wingmen. One wrong move at this spacing could be catastrophic. "Oceanic Tower, Hornet flight ready for departure," came the crisp voice over the speakers. Nathan's breath caught slightly. Even filtered through the communication system, he recognized that voice. Dylan. "Hornet flight, cleared for takeoff, winds 120 at 8 knots. Show them what Navy wings can do. The crowd pressed forward as the 4 F-18s aligned on the runway. Nathan remained where he was, knowing that the best view wasn't always the closest one. From his position, he could see the entire sequence, the simultaneous throttle advancement, the precise spacing as the aircraft accelerated, the moment when 4 sets of landing gear tucked cleanly into their wells as the formation lifted into the California sky. But something was wrong. Nathan's experienced eye caught what the crowd missed. Aircraft 3 was slightly out of position, lagging behind by perhaps half a second. In civilian aviation, such a deviation would be insignificant. In formation flying at demonstration speeds, it represented a potentially dangerous situation developing. The formation climbed steeply, banking left over the Pacific before turning back toward the field for their first demonstration pass. Nathan found himself unconsciously holding his breath, his hands gripping an imaginary stick as muscle memory from thousands of flight hours activated. He could feel the G-forces Dylan was experiencing, could anticipate the control inputs needed to maintain perfect formation spacing. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is the result of years of training and absolute precision flying, the announcer continued. These pilots are executing maneuvers at speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, with wingtip clearances measured in feet. The crowd gasped as the formation screamed overhead, the thunder of 8 engines washing over the spectators like a physical force. Children covered their ears while adults stared upward in awe. Nathan watched with the critical eye of an instructor, noting the slight correction Dylan made to maintain formation integrity, a subtle rudder input that prevented what could have been a dangerous situation. A security guard approached Nathan's position. "Sir, you need to move your cart. VIP seating is being set up here." "Of course," Nathan replied quietly, beginning to push his cart toward a maintenance area. As he moved, he passed a group of retired Navy officers, their caps and jackets marking them as former aviators. One was explaining the finer points of the demonstration to his grandchildren. "The lead pilot has to be absolutely perfect," the veteran was saying. "Everyone else flies off him. One mistake up there and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Nathan knew what he meant. Formation flying was unforgiving, especially at demonstration speeds and altitudes. From his new position near the maintenance sheds, Nathan had an unobstructed view as the formation set up for their next pass. This would be the crowd favorite, a high-speed, low-altitude run that would showcase the raw power of the F-18's twin engines. The aircraft approached from the south, initially invisible against the bright sky. Then they appeared, 4 dark arrows against the blue, flying in perfect line abreast formation at what Nathan estimated to be less than 500 feet altitude. The crowd erupted in cheers as the jets thundered past, afterburners painting brilliant flames against the sky. But Nathan's attention was focused on aircraft number 2, Dylan's aircraft. Something in the flight pattern caught his experienced eye, a subtle waggle of the wings, so brief that only another pilot would notice. It was a signal, but not one from the standard demonstration repertoire. Nathan felt a chill of recognition. Dylan had spotted him in the crowd. The formation climbed for their final maneuver, a spectacular bomb burst where all 4 aircraft would separate simultaneously in different directions, creating a flower pattern against the sky. Nathan watched as they reached altitude, his heart racing with a mixture of pride and concern. Dylan was pushing the envelope. He could sense it. Then it happened. Instead of following the planned bomb burst pattern, aircraft number 2 broke formation unexpectedly, banking hard right and descending toward the crowd line. The announcer's voice immediately took on a note of confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears one of our aircraft has deviated from the planned demonstration sequence. This is not part of the programmed display." The crowd murmured uncertainly as Dylan's F-18 approached at low altitude, far lower than safety regulations typically allowed for such demonstrations. Nathan knew instantly what was happening. His son was about to execute a solo flyby directly over his position. But why risk his career for such a gesture? The answer came as the Super Hornet roared overhead, so low that Nathan could see Dylan's helmeted head turned toward him in the cockpit. As the aircraft passed, it executed 3 sharp wing rocks. the traditional aviator's salute reserved for honoring fallen comrades or extraordinary service. The crowd fell silent, unsure of what they were witnessing. But the demonstration wasn't over. Dillon pulled his aircraft into a steep climbing turn, gaining altitude rapidly before rolling inverted and diving back toward the field. Nathan's eyes widened as he recognized the maneuver, a perfect replica of the victory roll he had performed over this very same field 30 years ago, the day he had been selected as the Navy's youngest Top Gun instructor. "This is highly irregular," the announcer continued, his voice betraying his confusion. "The pilot appears to be performing an unscheduled solo demonstration." Nathan stood transfixed as his son's aircraft carved through the sky with a precision and artistry that spoke of not just exceptional skill, but of deeper purpose. Every maneuver was flawless, every turn executed with the kind of perfection that separated good pilots from great ones. The crowd had gone from confusion to awe, recognizing that they were witnessing something special, even if they didn't understand what. Admiral Vincent Hayes appeared at Nathan's side, seemingly from nowhere. Nathan had seen the base commander around the facility but had never spoken with him directly. Hayes was a distinguished man in his 50s, his uniform immaculate, his bearing that of someone accustomed to command. "Nathan Morris," the admiral said quietly, not taking his eyes off the aerial display above. "Or should I say, Commander Nathan Morris, retired." Nathan's weathered hands gripped his mop handle more tightly, but his voice remained steady. "Just Nathan, sir. Been retired a long time now." Hayes smiled slightly. "Not so retired that your son forgot the lessons you taught him. That victory roll he just performed? I've seen the gun camera footage from when you executed the same maneuver over this field in 1993. Identical in every detail." The F-18 was coming around for what would clearly be its final pass. Nathan could see Dillon had rejoined the formation, which had been circling at altitude waiting for their missing wingman. But instead of a standard formation flyby, something extraordinary was developing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice had taken on a note of reverence, "we've just been informed that we're witnessing something unprecedented. The pilot performing these maneuvers is Captain Dillon Cooper, and we've learned that among our spectators today is a very special guest." Nathan felt the eyes of nearby spectators beginning to turn toward him, confusion evident on their faces. How could this maintenance worker be connected to the aerial artistry they were witnessing? Admiral Hayes stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce you to Nathan Morris, who served with distinction as Commander Nathan Morris, one of the Navy's most legendary Top Gun instructors. Commander Morris trained over 300 naval aviators during his career, including the pilot currently demonstrating overhead, his son." The revelation hit the crowd like a shockwave. The teenagers who had mocked him earlier stood frozen in disbelief. The family that had pushed past him now stared in recognition of their rudeness. Slowly, a handful of veterans in the crowd began to applaud, the sound growing as understanding spread through the spectators. But Nathan's attention remained focused on the sky, where Dillon's aircraft was approaching for what would be the demonstration's finale. The F-18 came in low and slow, landing gear extended in a configuration that spoke of precision, flying at its finest. As it passed overhead, Nathan could see his son's hand raised in salute through the canopy. The aircraft touched down perfectly, rolling out on the centerline with the kind of precision that made carrier landings look routine. As the engines wound down and the canopy opened, Nathan found himself walking toward the flight line, his cleaning cart forgotten. The crowd parted before him, no longer seeing a maintenance worker, but recognizing something far more significant. Dillon climbed down from his aircraft, removing his helmet to reveal features that clearly echoed his father's younger self. He walked directly to Nathan, his flight gear still bearing the evidence of high-G maneuvering, sweat marking his face where the oxygen mask had pressed against his skin. For a long moment, father and son simply looked at each other across the decades of separation that military service had created. Then, Dillon snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute. "Commander Morris, sir," Mission complete. Nathan returned the salute with the crisp precision that 30 years of service had ingrained in his muscle memory. Around them, the crowd had fallen silent, recognizing they were witnessing something profound. "That was quite a demonstration, son," Nathan said quietly, "though I suspect Admiral Hayes will have some questions about your deviation from the flight plan." Dylan grinned, the expression transforming his serious aviator's face into something younger, more vulnerable. "Worth it, Dad. I've been watching you work these hangars for months, seeing how people treated you, and I couldn't stand it anymore. They needed to know who you really are." Admiral Hayes approached, his expression unreadable. Nathan tensed slightly, knowing that his son had risked his career for this moment of recognition. In the Navy, deviation from approved flight demonstrations was a serious matter, regardless of the motivation. "Captain Cooper," Hayes began formally, "you'll be pleased to know that your demonstration has been approved retroactively. It seems the Navy's Public Affairs Office has been looking for exactly this kind of story, the connection between our legacy and our future." Nathan felt relief wash through him as Dylan's shoulders relaxed slightly. But the Admiral wasn't finished. "Commander Morris," Hayes continued, turning to Nathan, "I have a proposition for you. The Navy is always looking for experienced instructors, and it seems your teaching methods have stood the test of time remarkably well." Nathan looked confused. "Sir, I'm 68 years old and technically a civilian contractor now." "Age is just a number when it comes to sharing experience," Hayes replied. "How would you feel about returning to the classroom? Not as a line instructor, but as a senior advisor. Help us train the next generation of naval aviators with the same principles that created pilots like your son." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Nathan had spent 15 years invisible, his expertise unused, his knowledge gathering dust in the mundane routine of maintenance work. Now he was being offered the chance to return to what he had always done best, teaching young aviators how to survive and excel in one of the world's most demanding professions. "I'd be honored, Admiral," Nathan replied, his voice stronger than it had been in years. The crowd erupted in applause, understanding intuitively that they had witnessed something significant. Veterans in the audience stepped forward to shake Nathan's hand, sharing their own stories of instructors who had shaped their careers. Young aviators who had ignored him hours earlier now approached with newfound respect, eager to learn from someone whose reputation had been built in the crucible of actual combat experience. Dylan put his arm around his father's shoulders, the gesture simple but profound. "You know, Dad, I never told you this, but every time I strap into a cockpit, I hear your voice. Fly the aircraft first, worry about everything else second. That's what got me through Top Gun, through my first carrier deployment, through every challenging flight I've ever made." Nathan felt tears he hadn't shed in decades threaten to surface. For years, he had wondered if his teaching had made any real difference, if the countless hours spent with young aviators had truly prepared them for the challenges they would face. Now, he had his answer, standing beside him in the form of a son who had become everything Nathan had hoped he could be. As the crowd began to disperse and the aircraft were secured for the day, Nathan found himself surrounded by a growing group of aviators, both active duty and retired. Stories were shared, experiences compared, lessons passed from one generation to the next. It was what he had always loved most about naval aviation, the community, the shared understanding of what it meant to master machines that could kill you in an instant if you lost respect for their power. Admiral Hayes approached once more, this time carrying a manila folder. "Commander, if you're serious about returning to instruction, I have your first assignment. We're developing a new curriculum for formation flying and aerobatic instruction. I can't think of anyone better qualified to lead that program." Nathan accepted the folder, feeling its weight as more than just paperwork. It represented a return to purpose, a chance to contribute once again to something larger than himself. "When do we start, Admiral?" "Monday morning, 0800 hours. Your classroom is in Building 7, the same room where you taught before retirement. Some things, Commander, are too valuable to change." As the sun began to set over Oceanic Naval Air Station, Nathan walked toward the parking area with Dylan beside him. His cleaning cart remained where he had abandoned it, but somehow it seemed like an artifact from a different life now. Tomorrow he would return, not as maintenance staff, but as an instructor, ready to pass on the knowledge and experience that had been accumulating unused for too many years. "You know," Dylan said as they reached Nathan's truck, "I've got 2 weeks of leave coming up. Maybe it's time you told me some of those stories you always said you'd share someday." Nathan smiled, looking back at the hangars where his aircraft, for they were his aircraft again in spirit, if not in assignment, rested in their neat rows. "Someday just arrived, son. We'll start with the story of how I learned that the most important thing about being a pilot isn't how well you can fly. It's how well you can teach others to fly even better than you ever could." The Story Chronicles brings you stories of hidden heroes walking among us every day. Subscribe and never miss the moment when ordinary becomes extraordinary, when the custodian becomes the commander, and when one salute can change everything.